Hey y'all, I'm Walker. Um, and well, I'm here to talk about the fire. And technically, I wasn't at the church when the fire happened. Um, I was at home in Hyde Park unwinding after a long day after a Y Vibe summer camp that we had. It'd been a long summer. There'd been a few challenges with some of the students there. And it was getting a bit harder as the summer went on and as everyone kind of got tired of the heat. But there was just one day of camp left before the last day, which was our big beach trip. And that was going to be such a fun time. And I never ended up going on that beach trip because maybe an hour after the fire arrived, I came here and saw the church building was charred and realized, well, there goes summer camp. But I think there's some good things we can really take out of this. And we can be encouraged because this isn't the first time that God's let one of his houses of worship be destroyed. If you read the Bible and open up to the end of 2 Kings or 2 Chronicles or Jeremiah, you can see how God let the first temple in Jerusalem be destroyed. Now, a side note here, I'm not going to say that our church had a fire and the first temple was destroyed for the same reasons, because, clearly the Bible tells us that the first temple was destroyed because of the unfaithfulness of the Israelites. But I can tell you that after our fire, I saw nothing but faithfulness out of this church congregation. But it's still encouraging that this isn't the first time that God has let something like this happen. And the fire also displaced several people that were living right above this church. And when the first temple was destroyed, the entire nation of Israel was displaced, and they were taken into exile into Babylon. So even though the causes were probably different, these two events, on the surface, they look pretty similar. But one thing that's also encouraging is that God was faithful to his people even after the temple was destroyed. He took men and women like Daniel and Esther, and he put them in the positions of privilege and power where they could take care of the rest of his people. And just like God raised up Daniel and Esther, he touched the hearts of many of us so that we could help those people who were affected by the fire. When I got here, I decided that since my apartment building has an elevator, it would be good for me to take in Travis. And one of the first things that I noticed is that John and Emily and Beza immediately went out shopping to buy food for Travis and I while I was going to be hosting it. And if that wasn't enough, over the next few days, probably the exact same amount of food that they bought, or maybe even more, got donated to us piecemeal by just people who cared, and by people who aren't even part of this church community, by other churches. And that was probably the most well-fed part of my summer. But you know what? There's even better news. God didn't just keep raising up people to serve his nation in exile. He brought them back home. After about 70 years, hopefully it doesn't take that long for our church building to be rebuilt and for people who were displaced to find new homes. The people of Israel came back to Jerusalem, and they started rebuilding the temple, and they started rebuilding the walls. And we can read that in Ezra, in Nehemiah. And sure, they ran into a lot of roadblocks, but they, maybe our roadblocks might be insurance companies or unfriendly people who are going to break in and steal stuff while we're rebuilding. But God helped his people overcome all those roadblocks, and they did rebuild the walls, and they did build a second temple. And that's because he gave them great leadership too. He raised up Ezra and Nehemiah to help guide the people, not only in rebuilding, but also spiritually. And I think that God has given us great leadership too. I'm pretty sure it's Pastor Appreciation Month, by the way. So thank you to Pastor Brad and Pastor Taylor, who's not here with COVID. They've been giving us strong leadership in helping, guide us in our process in helping organize so many things, such as food donations, housing, volunteer hours for rebuilding. They've just been such a blessing to us that God has given us. So I think what we take away from this is that, at this point where the first temple was destroyed and the people of Israel were sent to exile, it seems pretty dark, maybe even hopeless, but God had our interests at heart. And ultimately, what that episode in the Bible pointed to was how in the darkness of our sin, God still had our interests at heart and sent Jesus to die for us. And so hopefully, just like that episode in the Bible pointed to Jesus and pointed to God's glory, our episode as a church can point to Jesus and point to God's glory. Thank you.